Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. Today we're going to get back into our very basic Bible study. We're going to be looking at chapter 37 of Genesis. Remember last chapter we saw genealogy or an account of the descendants of Esau. And now we're going to switch back to continue with the history of Joseph and see what happens to him. It's quite a amazing account, and I'll try to hit the high spots in here, but still try to keep it basic. So let's take a look. Chapter 37, verse 1. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. And these are the records of the generations of Jacob. Well, we've already seen the genealogy, so we know that he has 12 sons by now. So this is what's happened to these 12 sons, and it's going to focus on Joseph, but it involves all of the sons, as we'll see as we go on in these following chapters. Continuing with verse 2. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. We're going to see that Joseph is a little naive as we go along here. Of course, he's still quite young, but we're going to see that he makes a few decisions that are going to turn his brothers against him. I don't think he does them intentionally to aggravate them, but he's just a little naive and doesn't handle these situations very diplomatically. Verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. And so Israel makes the mistake of showing favoritism, and quite overtly making him a special coat. And of course his older brothers are thinking, well, what's he going to do for us? Where are our special gifts, But bad decision to show favoritism in a family. I beg your pardon. Verse 5. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Again, the naivety of Joseph. And he said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then the brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. I don't think Joseph shared the dream because he had any special ambition or anything, but he was just relating this dream that he had. But again, how naive to think his brothers wouldn't react negatively to this. Verse 9. Now he had still another dream, and related it to his brothers, and said, "Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And he related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him, and said to him, What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? So it was kind of a rebuke, saying, who do you think you are? You know, do you really think that this is going to happen, that we're all going to bow down to you? You need to get your ego in check. But that's what it seemed like to them. But it made his brothers hate him more. Verse 11, and his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So his father didn't forget this, but it must have troubled him to some degree. Verse 12, then his brothers went to pasture their flocks in Shechem. Now you remember, this is kind of an unusual place to go pasture the flocks, because Shechem is where they had massacred the men and looted the tribe's goods because they had violated their sister Dinah. Now, when that happened, Joseph was just a young boy. I don't know exactly how old, but Dinah, commentators have said, was probably 14 or 15, no older than that. And Joseph was born after Dinah, so he had to be, 12 or under, so he was a young boy, so he wasn't involved in that massacre or anything like that. He was quite young. And of course his brother Benjamin had not been born yet when that occurred. But these are the same ones that had committed that terrible atrocity, and now they're back near Shechem pasturing the flock. Verse 13, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So that's quite a distance for a young man of this age, 17 years old. I mean, but it's quite a distance traveling alone. A lot of dangers on the way. But his father wanted him to check on his brothers. Verse 15, and a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, what are you looking for? And he said, I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Then the man said, they have moved from here, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. So it's such a long distance, he was having a little trouble finding his way, and interacted with this man and put him on the right track. Verse 18, when they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. Well, with this coat of many colors, he was clearly identifiable. They could tell who it was from a long way off. And they start to plot against him to put him to death. It's hard for us to imagine, but as I said before, these are the same men that wiped out the Shechemites. And now they're plotting to do the same thing to Joseph. Or verse 19. And they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams. Little do they know, a lot's going to become of them. Verse 21. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, let us not take his life. Reuben further said to them, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So Reuben steps in to save his life. They throw him in the pit, And the indication right here is that his intent was to come back later and he'd rescue him, and that would put him in good with his father. Because he didn't like Joseph being the favorite either, and this might make some brownie points with his father. Verse 23, so it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. Some commentators think it was an old cistern, so that's why it mentions here there was no water in it. There was an empty. Verse 25, then they sat down to eat a meal. I mean, how crass, unfeeling. They take their brother, strip him of his coat, throw him in this pit with the intent of doing harm to him, and then they just sit down to eat a meal. Continuing, and as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. You've probably read in history books about Egypt and how they embalmed their dead, especially the important people. And so these materials, the gum and balm and myrrh, were used for embalming. So this was important and very desirable in Egypt. So they were going to trade this material down in Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. So that made sense to them. Rather than take his life, let's just get rid of him. Let's profit from this. Verse 28. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph to Egypt. So the Midianites and Ishmaelites are basically the same, of the same descendants, same tribe. They sell him 20 shekels of silver. Guess that was the going price for a slave at that time. Thus they're talking about the Ishmaelites, brought Joseph to Egypt, or took him to Egypt. Verse 29, now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He had not been there, apparently, when Joseph was sold, so he didn't know about that. And he sneaks back to get him, and he's not there. Verse 30, and he returned to his brothers and said, the boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? In other words, what am I going to do? And I would imagine they told him the story at that time of them having sold him. So this had to be pretty distressing to Reuben. And it probably didn't make any points with his brothers to know he had doubled back to get him out of the pit. Verse 31. So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not. They didn't even say, is it our brother's? Is it your son's? Verse 33. Then he examined it and said, it's my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So he buys into this this deception. Of course, remember, he's been a deceiver too. Back when his name was Jacob, he was a deceiver too. Now, of course, he's called Israel. But the narrative jumps back to his old name. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Verse 35. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. This term Sheol means a place where your dead spirit would go. And so he's basically saying, when I die, my spirit will see him in Sheol. In other words, there was some kind of afterlife. Verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of his bodyguard. So we're going to stop there today, but this is how Joseph winds up in Egypt. And now we're going to shift in the next chapter, and we're going to forget about Joseph for a while. We're going to see what happens to his brothers while he's in Egypt, and the story is going to flip back and forth. What's going on in Egypt, what's going on with his brothers and his family, what's going on in Egypt, back to what's going on with his brothers and family. So we're going to have some parallel narratives here about the history of what happens to Joseph. Well, I hope this has been interesting for you, and I hope you'll watch the next one. It really gets complicated in several regards, but it's just a wonderful account of the history of how Israel and his whole family winds up in Egypt. So far we just got Joseph there, but we're going to see how the whole family winds up in Egypt. And we're going to see how these brothers go through tremendous trials and stress and eventually confess to what's went on and turn their hearts to God. So we'll look forward to that. In the meantime, God bless, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.